Hi everyone, this is Alexander Lim, and welcome to Author Story, where on every episode we speak to a different author on a particular topic of interest. On today's episode are two co-authors, Arno Michaelis and Pardeep Singh Kaleka, who are generously sharing their experiences with racism on both sides in their book, The Gift of Our Wounds: A Sikh and a Former White Supremacist Find Forgiveness After Hate. And for those of you who are really interested, you can check out the book right now by clicking the Amazon link in the video description below. So Arno and Pardeep, welcome. It's great to have you guys with us on Author Story.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's great to talk to you.
Good
Cool.
morning, Alex.
Yes, good morning, good morning. So first off, guys, usually I start off the interview by giving our listeners a background on the author or authors. But given the subject matter, I think they'd rather hear it from you guys. So what's your background? Pardeep, can we start off with you?
Sure. I am a first generation immigrant. I came here when I was 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Immigrated from Punjab, India, which is close to kind of nestled between like Pakistan, Nepal, and that area. Very farming, rural
Mm-hmm.
town. My parents were farmers,
Mm-hmm.
and they came here because they wanted the same thing that most immigrants want, just a better life for their kids to grow up in, and in a safe environment, more opportunities,
Right.
things like that. And we made home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. Thinking back now, I'm like, man, couldn't we like chosen Florida or some other
Right.
place
Right.
warmer?
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, we came over in 1982.
Mm.
At that time, Milwaukee was sort of going through a transformation itself.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of jobs that were blue collar labor jobs, which had good good benefits and good wages,
Mm-hmm.
were leaving town, and so we really saw when we came over the decline of Milwaukee as a
Mm-hmm.
city, and just basically just chasing that American dream, working hard, and then watch my parents work hard.
Right.
They became business owners
Mm-hmm.
and ran a small mom and pop shop
Mm-hmm.
on the south side of Milwaukee for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, until like they could afford for us. And I say us as like me and my brother
Mm-hmm.
to be able to go off to college,
Nice.
and really really try to make our way into the American fabric
Mm-hmm.
while they worked and sacrificed for us to be able to do that.
All right. Right.
Um,
Okay.
my
And you're
brother became a
go ahead.
my brother became a teacher. And I became a police officer, and that's
Mm.
that was kind of our journey.
All right. Cool. And you are also a Sikh, correct?
I am.
All right. Cool. So we've got listeners all over the world. So for the benefit of those of us who are not familiar with Sikhism, what is this religion all about?
Sikhism is all about oneness. It's all about understanding the humanity of somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing the humanity in somebody else. A Sikh is a learner,
Mm-hmm.
and a Gurdwara, it's the Guru's door, translated literally, which is where you would do learning, where you would be educated.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really just about going on this lifelong pursuit of teaching and learning and growing, and we believe that the spirit or the source or God or whatever we call
Mm-hmm.
uh, is omnipresent, which means that like it's not kind of like outside of yourself, but
Mm-hmm.
it's within every living thing
Mm-hmm.
that exists, and so to really see the spirit in one another.
Mm. Okay, okay, interesting. Because I mean, I had to ask because a lot of people really they don't know what Sikhism is all about.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of times in America, you can a Sikh is easily recognized by what we call the dastar,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the turban, the kara, and most of those people in America who are wearing turbans are going to be Sikhs.
Mm, okay, okay, got that. Cool. So Arnold, let me ask you in your turn. What is your background?
Well, unlike Pardeep, I was born with the American dream handed to me on a silver platter.
Mm,
I grew up in a well-to-do suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Nice
mm,
house, nice neighborhood. Had everything that a kid could need. I had a lot of things going for me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
a ton of positive affirmation from all the adults in my life. But I grew up in an alcoholic household,
Mm.
and my parents really struggled uh, with their relationship, and my
Mm-hmm.
mom was miserable, and it made me miserable as a kid. So I started
Mm.
lashing out at other kids.
Right.
And as I grew older, I kind of got a habit of getting stimulation from antisocial behavior. And
Mm.
so as I grew older, the habit got more demanding, and I had to kind of escalate that behavior to get the same kind of kick out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I was 16, I had started drinking myself. I had been
Mm.
violent since I was a little kid.
Right.
I was really like habitualized into to hate and violence already, and then I heard white power skinhead music,
Mm-hmm.
which was real fast and aggressive, which I liked, but the lyrics were very seductive. They were the
Mm.
same kind of themes that Adolf Hitler used to twist the minds of so many Germans to the point of mass murder.
Mm-hmm.
Themes like race and nation and blood and soil. And I wasn't entirely ignorant as to why people were repulsed by that, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't care. All I cared was that it had the shock value and that it
Right.
really angered people.
Right.
And so that was why and how I got involved in white power ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent 7 years involved in neo-Nazi skinhead hate groups as a
Mm.
leader and an organizer and a street
Wow.
fighter.
Okay. Okay.
Um, there was this like growing exhaustion throughout those 7 years that came from all sorts of directions.
Right.
Uh, I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I had to like actively block out that knowledge that of the wrongness of my ideology as I went.
Right.
Uh, that took a lot of energy. It was exhausting to cut myself off from media and culture that I'd once enjoyed. I've
Right.
always been a film and music geek my whole life, and of course, when you're a white power skinhead, anything that's not like vehemently, violently white racist is
Right.
forbidden. So I
Uh-huh.
couldn't watch movies from Hollywood or watch anything on TV or
Right.
listen to music that wasn't white power music.
Mm.
But what was most exhausting was when people who I claimed to hate treated me with kindness. And I was
Mm.
very fortunate that throughout that 7 years, that would happen time and time again. So there
Mm.
were times that people like a Jewish boss, lesbian supervisor, black
Right.
and Latino coworkers
Right. Right.
treated me with kindness when I least deserved it.
Mm.
And that indicated beyond a shadow of a doubt how wrong I was.
Mm.
And those people were really defying me by responding to my hostility with kindness because
Mm.
everything I was doing was meant to provoke hostility.
Okay.
I, I,
Okay.
I wanted people to hate me. I wanted
Okay.
people to fight me.
Uh-huh.
And when people did that, they were literally putty in my hands.
Mm.
They were puppets on a string, and I was the puppeteer.
Right.
But when people had the courage to refused to let me make the rules of engagement, and instead they dictated the rules of engagement. They were
Okay.
basically saying like, this is how a human being should treat another human being,
Right.
and I'm going to demonstrate that for you.
Mm.
And those acts of kindness, I believe, were a huge factor leading up to the exhaustion that built until after 7 years. I was looking for an excuse to leave,
Mm.
which came in kind of a two-stage process. In '94, I broke up with my girlfriend and became a single parent to our 18-month-old daughter. And a
Mm.
couple months later, a second friend of mine was murdered in a street fight.
Ouch.
At that point, I had lost count of how many friends had been incarcerated. So it
Right.
finally hit me that if I didn't change my ways, death or prison was going to take me from my daughter.
Right.
So all those, and I'd also definitely have to say that my parents, for all their struggles, never gave up on me, and always let me know that they loved me and that they weren't gonna turn their backs, and that was as huge a factor as everything else falling into place. So I left white power skinhead hate groups in 1994.
Mm.
A couple years later, being a man of extremes, I went from extreme hate and violence to extreme peace and love in
Mm.
the rave scene, going to underground techno parties in the
Right.
south side of Chicago all night. I did that for another 7 years, and that was a really important part of my healing process. All these people who I would have attacked years earlier. People of color, LGBT people, they all welcomed me and embraced me and really helped lead me back to humanity.
Mm.
I quit drinking in 2004. I started writing in 2007,
Mm.
and that led to me founding an online magazine called Life After Hate in
Mm.
2009. And that's what I was doing when August 5th, 2012 came around.
Mhm. Right. And the incident on that time, on that date, it was one of Pardeep's friends, right? Or someone he knew was killed in a mass shooting. Is this correct?
No, my father was killed in a mass
Your
shooting.
father. Okay, okay, all right. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
No,
Okay,
yeah,
and
so,
go ahead.
yeah, my father and five others were killed in that mass shooting,
Yeah.
along with the shooter himself,
Mm.
who engaged in a firefight with police once he tried to escape
Right, right.
and took his own life.
Oh, okay. And Arno, what made you decide to connect with Pardeep after an incident like this?
Actually, Pardeep reached out to me
Oh, okay.
a couple months after the shooting.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Got that. Cool. And since then, you guys have been working together then.
Yeah, and the reason that we reached out to Arnold was that we saw Arnold had turned his life around, and really
Mm.
like using this incident, we knew that the shooter Wade Page, what he wanted to incite was more hate.
Mm.
Right? He was
Right.
hateful and he wanted to incite more hate.
Right. Right.
And just like Arnold said, we weren't going to allow him to initiate the terms of that incident,
Right.
and really turn that around and say, no, we're going
Right.
to define what this means going forward.
Right.
And yeah, me and Arnold have been working together for the last 5.5 years,
Mm.
defining exactly what that moment meant for not only just us, but for this country.
Right. Right. Well, that's definitely a worthy cause right there. Cool. So guys, just to let you know, I just like to acknowledge that it's raining here on and off. So if you hear some background noise, that's the rain coming in strong.
That's
No
a
problem.
rain
Okay.
nourishes the earth.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So let me get a little bit to basics here. I'm sure there were, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of the stereotype of a white supremacist being some beer guzzling guy, but this really isn't the case, is it?
Well, I was certainly a beer guzzler back in my days. I was, and I definitely need to say that I'm never ever going to use my alcoholism as an excuse
Right.
for my behavior. I don't think there's ever an excuse for hate. I don't think there's ever an excuse for violence. There is always a reason though,
Hmm.
and reasons are not excuses. But it was definitely the alcoholism was basically like a co-presenting symptom. It
Hmm.
wasn't that you will see quite often
Hmm.
in a lot of hate groups and in violent extremist groups of all sorts. I work as a counter violent extremist consultant, and I do this internationally. So I work with people to prevent violent extremism of every sort, whether it's religious or political or racial or whatever.
Right.
And in all of those types of ideologies, it really you need a background of suffering for someone to be susceptible to it.
Mm.
And with that suffering, there's very often substance abuse co-presenting
Right.
in that process.
Right. But what I'm trying to point out is, there isn't any one stereotype of person. Like you can say, that guy belongs to the white supremacist group. Because, I mean, even guys in coats and ties, they could belong to a white supremacist group.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The first time that I met, or when I reached out to Arnold, I
Mm.
asked him. I said, "What restaurant do you want to go to?"
Mm.
And one of my points of relief was that he didn't say that he wanted to go to a bar and meet up, but he
Right.
wanted to go to a Thai restaurant
Uh-huh.
and meet there. And
Okay.
I was kind of relieved to find out that he didn't drink anymore as well.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but yeah, no, we talk about like those biopsychosocial factors that exist
Yes.
within people, and definitely there's a lot of vulnerability issues that
Mm.
that anybody has to get involved in any kind of violent extremist movement or narrative. It's just people are that way, that they're coping with life, or coping with things using alcohol or drugs.
Hmm. Right, right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, like what are the principles or guiding thoughts, so to speak, behind white supremacy or even racism?
It really boils down to irresponsibility.
Hmm.
When things are going wrong in your life, it's much easier to blame someone else or to blame a group of people. And in fact, it's all the better if it's a monolithic group or if it's some kind of shadowy conspiracy, because that way you can disconnect from your day to day reality
Hmm.
and in your head create this world where you're not at fault for anything. You're not responsible for anything that's going wrong in your life. It's some kind of Jewish conspiracy, or it's the deep state,
Right,
or the Illuminati, or whoever.
right.
It's a ridiculous um, practice of blame and casting off of your own ability to solve those problems, and that's what we preyed upon in order to recruit people. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was running a hate group and I'd run into some disgruntled white kid, the first thing I would do would be to find out what's going wrong in his life.
Hmm.
So if he doesn't have a job, it's because the Jews are bringing all these Mexicans over here to take his job.
Mm.
It's
Okay.
not because he dropped out of high school and doesn't go to college and
Right.
he doesn't do anything to better himself.
Hmm.
It's because of these shadowy, ominous outside forces.
All right.
And so for someone who's struggling, it's much easier to go, oh, that's not my fault. That's so and so's fault.
Hmm.
And the very tragic thing is that process it accelerates the downfall of that person's life, of
Hmm.
course, because obviously blaming Jews for their misfortune is not going to solve any of their problems. It's going to make them worse.
Right.
And as those problems get worse, they basically fall deeper into the clutches of the ideology.
Hmm.
So it becomes this really wicked, vicious circle that
Right.
can destroy someone's life very quickly. And if we look at Wade Page, the man who killed Pardeep's father and five other people, he is a poster boy for this. He
Hmm.
was in his early 40s. He had no career.
Hmm.
He worked menial minimum wage factory jobs.
Hmm.
His family had disowned him.
Hmm.
He had a brief rocky relationship with a woman that he tried to salvage by proposing to her, and she turned him down. And so basically his life was just in shambles because of his practice of hate and violence that he had
Hmm.
been indulging in for over 10 years. And rather than wake up and say, hey, what could I do different that would salvage my life, he continued to blame other people, and that's what led to the tragedy of August 5th, 2012.
And,
Hmm.
and real quick, Alex, I think just piggybacking off of what
Right.
Arnold's speaking about this shooter,
Right.
society has a way to fuel that as well.
Hmm.
And so society's responsibility, and when we talk about white supremacists or racism, it's very unique to America, and so is the way that we look at it. We in America we look at things with the perspective or lens of judgment,
Hmm.
and we think that we can judge people out of these movements or out of being having this or having this type of ideology.
Hmm.
And what we really need to understand is that, you know what, there's a lot of pain and trauma and historical trauma. It's very complex,
Hmm.
and we need to really start say, okay, you know what are some of the solutions, and rather than judgments. We are starting to get to a more mindful culture in America, but
Hmm.
that is going to take process. That's going to take us actually saying, okay, what is mindfulness? And if mindfulness is I'm going to reserve judgment, and for this person, this person was a person. When we get into the habits of saying, well, you know what, I'm going to call this person this person is a white supremacist, or this person is evil.
Yeah.
Well, you
Right.
can demonize the ideology,
Uh-huh.
right? But
Yeah.
when we demonize people, then that person has nowhere to go but down from there.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once you're labeled this, then it's like you're like this forever.
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool. So I take it then that you mentioned society, so I guess social isolation comes into play, and that's really a complicated thing, as you mentioned the various reasons behind that.
Yeah, I mean, so isolation, suffering. Me and Arnold talk quite a bit about this in workshops
Hmm.
that we do all over the place. Obviously we use the book
Hmm.
and our own memoirs and stories, but we talk about isolation, and we also talk about rejection,
Hmm.
and that rejection could either be real or perceived. But to that person, rejection can be that fuel to like put them over the edge. And you'll look at any one of these shootings, and you'll see that there were some forms of either real or perceived rejection
Hmm.
that that person was going through,
Hmm.
um, and really like saying how do we build a more interconnected, inclusive culture where people feel like they're not being rejected.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it occurs to me then, based on what you say, then that the violence that explodes, it occurs to me as being, well, it's a cry for help, but also a way to control their lives. Is this correct? I mean, my point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Pardeep is a licensed therapist, and he specializes in trauma. And
Hmm.
I've learned so much about him or from him about mental health.
Hmm.
And this element of needing to control something when everything else is out of control is something that presents itself not only in violent extremism, but it's the same mechanism that people go through if they have a substance abuse issue, if they have an eating disorder.
Mm.
All these illnesses are means of people trying to control something in their life when everything else is out of control.
Hmm.
So again, going back to Wade Page, his whole life had crumbled before him because of his poor decisions, and rather than like face that very sad knowledge, which is difficult. It's
Yeah.
a hard thing to do when you're 40 years old to be like, hey, I've been messing up for over a decade. I need to sort my. I was wrong that whole.
Hmm.
It's very difficult for any human being to say they were wrong about anything,
Hmm.
much less something that they believe vehemently for a decade.
All right.
And so rather than go through that very arduous process,
Hmm.
he just continued to blame people. And that was a control mechanism. He can control how he views other human beings. And all of us can do that. And part of the work that Pardeep and I do is to really just help people understand that their ability to control the lens that they view the world through is a
Hmm.
really powerful thing, and then you
Hmm.
can control it for horrendous evil, or you can control it for really inspirational good. And so we try to guide people toward the latter path.
Right, right. And this is very interesting for me because I'm getting an inside view on, on someone I might consider, oh gosh, he's beyond the pale, but there is a very human story behind all this. I mean, people just don't become uh, white supremacists or racists just like that, apparently. I mean, there's something that goes on.
We do a lot of workshops, a lot of professional development for educators as well as for businesses, and for young people of all ages. And one of the themes we use over and over again is very simple, and it's that hurt people hurt people.
Hmm.
And when we remind ourselves that anyone who is acting out, anybody who is has antisocial behavior, anybody who's going through anything, they're doing it because they're suffering.
All
And
right.
when we can be mindful of that, we can respond to them with compassion
Hmm.
rather than aggression, which breaks that cycle of violence.
Hmm.
It's very important to point out that this by no means entails that we accept violent behavior, that we accept hateful behavior.
Hmm.
There's certainly times when people need to be neutralized by force if necessary and put somewhere where they can't hurt themselves or other people.
Hmm.
Um, that I'm not a pacifist. It's just a fact of life that that's necessary sometimes. But when it is necessary, it's crucial that it's done from a place of compassion
Hmm.
and not a place of aggression, not a place of vengeance.
Hmm.
And when we come from compassion, we're in a position to solve problems rather than exacerbate them.
All right, right. So this thing is I mean, this is a problem. I mean, racism and all that stuff. This is a problem. So what can be done from your point of view? I'm sure you're doing something along these lines, but what can be done to minimize this hatred of race, hatred of others?
I mean, very, very generically, understand what's fueling it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff that we talked about is fueling is that ability, or it's that inability to recognize your own choices being made, and how that's contributing to your suffering. But I think overall we need to understand that it's complex.
Mm-hmm.
It exists in our history. It exists in our systems.
Mm-hmm.
It exists in our individuals. And if we don't understand the complexity of it, if we're just simply judging it out of existence, and when I go down up and down my social media feed, and I think this is for most people who are going up and down their social media feed, people are still convincing us that racism is well and alive. So there's those that who are kind of like, you know what, it doesn't really exist,
Uh-huh.
and there's merit for that to say, okay, you know what, racism is well and alive.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's a whole lot of people who do accept that it exists, but really saying, what's the solution?
Mm-hmm.
And we got to get back to becoming a solution focused country rather than a problem centered country. And this is, well, I mean, just the propensity of like what you see on your social media feeds
Mm-hmm.
will tell you that there's so many problems, and that will overwhelm the shit out of you to say, I can't do anything about this
All
because
right.
there's so much going wrong.
All
When
right.
the reality is that each and every one of us could do something within our own spheres, and really we are, a lot of people are doing a lot of this work and stand on that wall. So I mean, just keep doing it, stay committed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, the water that you sort of the boil in, don't become so used to it that you can't challenge your own lens,
All right.
as I was speaking of, to really come back and say, you know what, let me challenge myself.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get uncomfortable. Even if I believed in something for 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
let me come back and say, okay, is that good right now? Is that good information right now?
Mm-hmm.
Really starting from ourselves and challenging our own lens before we go out and do societal work,
All right.
um, is really important.
All right. So
And
we're
another very simple thing that I think everyone can do, and it's simple but very challenging. It can be very, very difficult,
mm-hmm.
especially when you're dealing with people who are exhibiting behavior and actions that disgust you. But it's simply seeing yourself in others,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, especially when it seems like that person couldn't be any more different than you.
All right.
In the Oak Creek Gadwara, after the shooting, the Gadwara was a horror show.
Mm-hmm.
There was blood all over the walls, all over the floors. There was bullet holes everywhere. There's one. It was cleaned up by the people in the Gadwara,
Mm-hmm.
which I can't imagine how difficult that was to do. But there's one bullet hole that they left,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the doorway to the main meditation and prayer room.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a plaque above that bullet hole that says "We are one."
Mm-hmm.
That principle is what you put front and center when you see yourself in someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And that simplicity is really what people need to do across the board, no matter who you are, what color your skin is, who you're attracted to, how much money you don't got, what kind of politics you like. It doesn't, none of that matters more than seeing ourselves in others. And when we see ourselves in others, now all those differences can actually become assets
Mm-hmm.
that make us more capable of solving problems.
Mm-hmm. All right. Cool. Got that. All right. So those are, geez, those are pretty interesting insights right there. So got a couple of questions here. First one for Arno. Let's say you came across someone who thinks, the white race top of the heap, but who might be willing to consider that that isn't the case. And you only had time to tell that person one thing. What would be that one thing you would tell that person?
I think the one thing I tell people who have ideas of racial superiority, and it's actually very easy, is to say that there's people of all sorts who have greatness in them and people who have challenges that they're facing. And I've done this over and over again with people from the Ku Klux Klan or neo-Nazis. I can say, you know, do you know any people of color that are good people? And if they're honest, they'll be like, yeah, I know this guy Joe at work, and you know, he's a black guy, but he works really hard, and he takes care of his family, and he always shows up on time. And then I said, you know, any white people who you know could make better decisions than what they do? And every single time they're like, yeah, yeah. Especially if you're out in like the rural part of the country, they're like, yeah, I know this guy who's on meth and he's beating his wife, and
Right.
it's if somebody is honest, and you can tell they know if they're honest or not, and I know
Right.
if they're honest or not. If somebody honestly looks at that question, it real quick they will admit that there's good and bad in all people, and once you come to that realization, this idea of like racial superiority doesn't make any sense.
Right. All right. Got that. Got that. Now, Pardeep, let me ask you a similar question. Now, let's say you came across someone who was on the receiving end of a hate crime, and again, you only had time to tell this person one thing about healing or learning something from the experience. What would be that one thing you tell them?
Well, I mean, I reference to our book, The Gift of Our Wounds, and tell them
Mhm.
that their pain uh, has a purpose.
Mhm.
You know, and depends on like who, what, where they are in their journey. I would, you know, I've worked with sexual assault survivors to other trauma survivors, and I would never tell them, you know, as far as like if they're too fresh in their journey, that their pain has some kind of reason, because they wouldn't believe it.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, that's kind of what this book is about. Is just to say, you know what, we all have these wounds. We all have been hurt, and we also have also hurt other people. Within Sikhism, there's the truth that in every person exists the good and the bad, both of them, and both of them are wrestling at times, and it really takes and challenges you to see uh, the good in someone who might be exhibiting bad behavior,
Right.
such as that. And
Right.
so I would present it as a challenge to themselves, as being a good, first and foremost, human being.
Mhm.
If the person was sick, I would utilize that and say, if the person was Muslim, I would say, you know, this is universal in all different religions and faiths
Mhm.
and cultures, that you know, this yin and yang, or this good bad, this American, you know, the Native Americans would call it, you know, what wolf are you feeding? But this is universal in different faiths. And I would just utilize that and challenge them and say, you know what, can you see the good in this person? And can you see like how much they've been fed this evil or this bad, and what can you do about it?
Mhm. Right. Okay. Got that. Got that. So, in the last few minutes of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share to inspire our listeners or make them think a little?
I think one of the most powerful things I've learned along my journey, among all kinds of amazing things, which I'm a Buddhist, but I'm always very inspired by Sikhi, and that the emphasis on learning. And so I'm excited when I contemplate things I've learned. And one of those is that as human beings, we find what we seek.
Hmm.
Um, Tragically, far too many people are not aware of this, and
Hmm.
so they're subconsciously looking for reasons to be angry, looking for reasons to be hateful,
All right.
reasons to be outraged, um, and when they could be looking for reasons to be inspired,
All right.
and reasons to love people, and reasons to solve problems,
Hmm.
and it's much more difficult to find the good in the world every day.
Hmm.
It's easy to find the bad. It's easy to get discouraged. And again, this goes back to the same way we recruit people in the white power groups.
Hmm.
We 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 pray. We offer the easy path.
Hmm.
The difficult path is so much more rewarding though. And as it's difficult to find reasons to be inspired when things seem to be really intimidating in a personal life or in a societal level, it becomes all the more important to do so then. So I would offer to people that if they're having a rough time in their life, if they're discouraged about the state of the world, like have them ask themselves, what are they looking for?
Mhm.
And if and is that what they really want to find everywhere they look? Today, I choose to look for the basic core goodness of human existence, and I find it everywhere I look. Whether I'm looking up at a pure blue sky or a wonderfully stormy, dark, cloudy sky, or I'm looking at party, or I'm scrolling down my social media feed.
Mhm.
In every situation, if I'm looking for the good, I'll find it.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that as well,
Right.
Alex, like
Go ahead.
that's kind of clinical name. It's called choice bias. You know, we
Mhm.
often talk about confirmation bias, which
Mhm.
is one of the most typical biases that we have. But choice bias is definitely what Arnold was talking about. We can go up and Google and say, okay, how good is Trump, or how
Mhm.
bad is Trump,
Mhm.
and those two will reveal two different things.
Right.
But whatever we start to invest in or put our choices into, that will carry more weight uh, within like our confirming with our already held beliefs.
Mhm.
So that, and then there's also ownership bias of like saying that whatever you might own
Mhm.
might be worth more than somebody else's thing. So you have a house that's the same as somebody else. Well, the one that you own is
Mhm.
all of a sudden worth more than the one that somebody else owns.
All right, cool. So, that's those are pretty interesting words right there, and very wise words, I must say. Very wise words. Okay
Thanks,
then.
Alan.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, in closing, then, the book is The Gift of Our Wounds: A Sikh and a Former White Supremacist Find Forgiveness After Hate. The authors are our guests, Arno Michaelis and Pardeep Singh Kaleka. So, Arno, Pardeep, thank you very much for being an author story. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your insights with us and our listeners.
Thank you for having us on, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Really enjoyed the conversation.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, everyone, I invite you all to check out The Gift of Our Wounds. And of course, please feel free to subscribe to our channel since you'll never know what you can pick up from listening to our interviews. So, catch you all next time on Author Story Weekly Interviews with another amazing author.